I'm here tonight. You all are the 21st stop in a 25 county tour because of the urgency of the hour and the moment. And you know, all of us are volunteer. I'm a volunteer. You don't get paid. And I don't say that to get anything. I simply say that we do this work because it's in our heart. Because somebody way long years ago, as my grandma used to say, way long years ago, they suffered, they went to jail. I was reading out there in 64 how 60 people in this city went to jail in the city. Anybody was in those cities in the 60s? Right here, give them a hand, amen. And the only pay they got was the pay of hoping for a better future. And most of those movements were not didn't get picked up in the newspaper, in the history books outside. A lot of stuff happened. I was telling Brother Matthew, down in Swan Quarter, students decided to walk from Swan Quarter to Raleigh. That never got in the history book. I mean, we know about Greensboro, and I'm not putting those things down that did get in the history book, but we owe a lot of people. I was in Statesville the other day, and they talked about in Statesville as how in 1963 or 4, they had a march, 600 people, and in Statesville they ran out of tear gas. So they said, oh, we know what to do. They went down to the factory and got industrial strength insecticide and sprayed it all on those black and white people. And they stood there and burned so that we might be free. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege, I'm on the national board of the NAACP because you all voted and supported me, and I take that service very seriously and the opportunity of God to serve. So I was in Jackson, Mississippi. And there in Jackson, Mississippi was with Merle Evers, the widow of Medgar Evers. And she told a story about his life, how he never drove anywhere less than 90 miles an hour. Back then there was no speed limit. And it was because of the threats. Always somebody, never let anybody come up beside the car, had a gun in every room, had furniture up against the wall in every window. And she told a story of the stress that they had, and yet he did this work. And you know, the anniversary of his death is this coming Wednesday, June the 12th, the same night that John F. Kennedy announced that he was going to promote the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. June 12, 1963. A little bit over 46 days before the March on Washington. The March on Washington, August 28, 1963. And when you think about that, you think about the travesty that 50 years ago, Medgar was fighting for voting rights in Jackson, Mississippi. 63, this 50 years ago, I was born. My mother was pregnant. I was born August 30th, 1963, 2 days after the March on Washington. 63, my father had a master's degree in education and a master's degree in theology and an undergraduate degree in science and physics, and my mother had 10 years of service in the Silver Air Patrol and a degree in business and didn't have protected voting rights. 50 years ago, right in the day. And the Birmingham movement was going on 50 years ago. Dr. King was in jail in Birmingham, and he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail when clergy suggested that he ought to preach and be focused on personal salvation and not deal with the social issues. And Dr. King, as I paraphrase it, in essence said, well, if you take out dealing with social issues, you got to get rid of Micah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Isaiah, and you got to throw Jesus away too. Because you know, and he was in jail. And you think about that today, what we're seeing in North Carolina, that where blacks and whites were working together for voting rights and moving us forward. And John F. Kennedy, a Catholic and who happened to be white, said it's time to deal with civil rights. We are seeing an all-out attack on much of that today right here in North Carolina. And some of us have to decide, ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. That we may not go forward together, that we may not take big steps forward, but we're not gonna take steps backwards. And so that's why we're here tonight. 25 tours, because on August, we've been building this massive coalition ever since 2006. The NAACP, we started out, and now we have 147 organizations, church, connected with 100 branches of the NAACP, called the Historic Thousands on Jones Street People's Coalition. And with that coalition working over the last few years, because we challenge both parties. We don't just challenge any one party, we're nonpartisan. And we pushed and we won same-day registration, early voting. We pushed and we won the earned income tax credit. I mean we, the whole group, not the NAACP alone. We pushed and we won the Racial Justice Act. We pushed and we won more money for education. And in 2008, we saw a massive turnout of the vote. In fact, the reality is President Obama lost North Carolina in 2008 on election day, but he won it during the same day registration, early voting, and Sunday voting. And so we know that when you open up voting, when people have, when there's an unhindered access to the polls, which the Constitution provides, because the 15th Amendment of the Constitution says you cannot deny or abridge my right to vote. So it's not just Jim Crow that denies the right to vote. You can't even engage in James Crow Esquire, his son. You can't do anything to put a hindrance between my right to vote. And so we pushed people out to vote, and we saw the most massive turnout of vote in 2008 North Carolina's ever seen. 68% of the black community, nearly 1.5 million people used early voting, and it produced President Obama, a southern state. The solid South began to break open. It produced progressive politics, but we also saw at that very point an all-out attack by an ultra-conservative ideology that says something wrong, this is wrong, this can't be right. So they started saying the voting was fraudulent. And all of a sudden you saw 38 states began to attack voting and want voter ID and all of these different things to suppress the vote in the 21st century. And we've seen an all-out attack. Now it's not new. I want to go do a little history before I get to where we are today, because in the 1800s, 1868, right after the slavery, we wrote a new constitution, and blacks and whites, Lincoln Republicans, not the Republicans today, or not all of them, it was Lincoln Republicans and blacks came together in the South and they formed something called fusion politics. And between 1868 and 1872, they passed the most progressive voting laws, labor laws, criminal justice laws. They passed the most progressive education law. In fact, in North Carolina, education was guaranteed in the Constitution. It was put there because a black minister and a white minister, two fusion Republicans, said we need to guarantee education. Equal protection under law was guaranteed in the state constitution before it was guaranteed in the federal. 1868, 145 years ago. But by 1872, there was a reaction against it, because blacks and whites were moving together. In almost all of the former Confederate states, blacks either controlled the General Assembly or they had a controlling block of votes. And when you hook those votes with blacks and whites, you got progressive public policy. So what happened between 1868 and 1872, you get the formation of the Klan. Then in 1872, you get a group that comes up, calls themselves the Redeemers. The Redeemers. They wrap themselves in religious language, but they do irreligious things. And they say we've got to, and listen, in 1872, they started saying we got to take our country back. They were the precursors to the Tea Party. And they were Dixiecrats. And they began, the first thing they attacked was voting rights. Then they attacked educational rights. Then they attacked criminal justice law. And then they attacked tax policy. They said we got to cut taxes. This is 1870, 1880. Why cut taxes? Well, they said that They didn't want to see African Americans get the 40 acres and a mule. They didn't want to see programs put in place that would uplift the former slaves. They didn't like blacks and whites working together. They said that's wrong, that we need to be redeemed from the sin of justice. That's what our message was. We need to be redeemed from all this black-white working together. That ain't right. That's not what God intended. And so by 1898, they become so vicious that they produced the atmosphere for a riot, the riots of Wilmington, 1898. And that ended the first Reconstruction in North Carolina. And by 1906 or 7, 2 or 3 years before the founding of the NAACP, white supremacy had become the law of the land. Voting rights were taken, educational rights were undermined, and that ended the first Reconstruction. Then in 1954, you get the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and you get the second Reconstruction. In 1955, Emmett Till gets killed, and his death inspires Rosa Parks. When Emmett Till's mama left his casket open, Rosa Parks said she saw that and she could not get involved, and that inspired her. And so you had the 54th decision, Brown, that overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson anti-Reconstruction decision of the Supreme Court that said separate but equal was constitutional. Brown overturns that in 54. 55, Rosa Parks sits down. Montgomery, the movement starts. Dr. King is drawn in. And between 54 and 65, you get Medicaid, you get the expansion of Social Security, you get the war on poverty, you get the 64 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act. And that came with a price. Blacks and whites coming together, Latinos coming together, labor and people of faith, fusion politics, 20th century. And it changes America, because every time the South changes, America changes. And a lot of that change in the 60s happened right here in North Carolina. But just like there was a reaction in 1872, there became a reaction in the 1960s. George Wallace, Lester Maddox. You go on down through, even right here in North Carolina, they came up with something called the Pearsall Plan to block the implementation of Brown versus Board of Education. All of these reactions. And then in 1968, by that time you get the death of Malcolm, the death of Medgar, the death of white and black people being killed, the death of Kennedy, and the death of Martin. And that the killing depresses the movement. And you have the end of the second Reconstruction. And then Nixon runs for office, and his political advisor is named Ken Phillips. And Ken Phillips says, I know how to stop all this coming together and working together. Let's come up with a white Southern strategy. Let's come up with a political plan that will cause working class white people in the South to vote against their own self-interest, so we can guarantee that the former Confederate states will always vote ultra-conservative. It's called the White Southern Strategy. You can read about it anywhere. And they implemented it. But as Lee Atwater told us before he died, he got tongue cancer, but before he died, he did this interview. And Lee Atwater described the White Southern Strategy. He said, in 1954 in the South, if you wanted to win an election, you had to use the N-word. But by 1964, you couldn't use the N-word anymore. So you had to learn how to talk race in the abstract and get working class white people to vote against their own interests. So they came up with terms like forced busing. That's the new word for we're anti-desegregating schools, or states' rights, or we're anti-taxes, code. We don't want to pay for programs that are helping these black and brown people. Entitlements became a negative word, but the same programs that now black and brown people had access to in the 60s, working class and poor white folk had benefited in the 1940s and 50s. But now they became a negative code word. And those code words were used to incite fear among Southern whites and caused them to vote against their own self-interest. And that's what created the so-called Solid South. And it ended the Second Reconstruction. And then something happened in 2008. It wasn't just the election of President Barack Obama. It was the electorate that elected him, that exposed that if you run a campaign of hope and justice for all, you can get working class white people and black people and Latinos and labor and faith to get beyond just Democrat, Republican, and liberal versus conservative, and start thinking about their future as one people. And his elections, not him, but the electorate in this state, blacks, whites, Latinos, people of faith, labor, gay, straight, coming together around progressive ideas and voting together, shocked the South. Because the South, North Carolina had not voted, and I'm not being partisan, I'm telling political history, had not voted for a Democrat since '76, Jimmy Carter. And he wasn't seen as progressive or liberal. But when that happened in Florida, well, we kind of expect Florida because they got a lot of northern Virginia, but they got northern Virginia. But when it happened in North Carolina, and when it happened because of our movement, and because we had opened up voting patterns and all those kinds of things through this coalition, it signaled the beginning of the Third Reconstruction. And the ultra-conservative forces that know that every time you get blacks and whites and Latinos and stuff to start working together, you get progressive policy that undermines the ability of corporate greed to simply extract money out of the society, and people get help. They knew it because they know history too. So it took them 30 years to stop the first Reconstruction. It took them 14 years to stop the second Reconstruction. So when this happened in 2008, they started immediately. That we can't wait. And my friends, I know that I took a minute to do that history, but you gotta understand that we're in the middle of a transformative moment. We very well may be in the middle of the Third Reconstruction that will finish the work of promise of justice and equality throughout this nation. Because when the South changes, the nation changes. And if you understand that, you will not be depressed. You will understand that people are fighting so hard because they know that narrow-minded, regressive, extreme ideology doesn't have much longer lasting in the public square, because the new demographic and the way people are thinking, they're tired of it. And so it's kind of like a last grasp for power. It's kind of like a, let me hold on, let me try to restructure things to delay a future that can't be denied. Can't be denied. Because now God has fixed it. That hands that once picked cotton can hook with white hands and Latino hands and pick not only president, but governors. African Americans are 25% of the electorate in North Carolina. Latinos 4%. That's 29%. All you need is 22 or 23% of working and progressive white people to vote their future and not their fears. And this narrow-minded stuff won't work anymore. That's right. It won't work anymore. And so we're right in the middle. We're right in the middle. And we see this fight back, this massive attack, because you know the political pendulums, they swing. So in 2000, and just before 2010, let me tell you how the fight back started in North Carolina. They filed a case called LaRoque versus Holder in Kinston to try to overturn Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We beat it. Now the Shelby case out of Alabama made it to the Supreme Court, but in North Carolina, we beat it back. So then 2010, we had a little lull in voting. They get a majority in the state Senate and the state House. They try to pass voter ID, which is a solution in search of a problem. And Governor Perdue, because of our coalition and strength, vetoes it. The only Southern governor to do it. We beat him back. But we couldn't stop him on redistricting because the governor doesn't have veto power. So they passed the most race-based redistricting plan since the 19th century. They packed 52% of black people into 3 congressional districts out of 12. 52%. It's called packing, stacking, and bleaching. They packed 49% of black people into 19 out of 50 Senate districts. They packed 51% of black people into 27 out of 120 House districts, so that blacks and whites could not join together, not to elect black people, but to elect candidates of their choice. We took them to court. The court is actually just finished hearings today on the redistricting plan because the courts have said something ain't right with this. Because see, the only data you have when you draw district plans is race. You don't have income, and you don't have age, and you don't have gender. The only thing that's on the computer is race. So the courts want to know, why is it that when you drew these lines in one county, you drew one line straight through a house, so that the kid in the house that's 18 voted in one, black kid voted in one precinct, and the parent voted in another. What's that about? That doesn't make sense. So the courts have said, we got to examine this, because this is race. You know, why would you put 52% of one people in 3 congressional districts? Why would you stack and pack black folk in the districts like that? And so the courts have said, we're going to examine it. But we couldn't stop them because the courts allowed the election to go forward. And so with gerrymandering districts, that's how they won the supermajority. They cheated. They gerrymandered the districts, stacked and packed black voters, and even though you had the highest turnout of black voters in 2012 ever in the history of this state, and the second highest of white voters, and even though in many races you had more Democrats, people vote for Democrats than Republicans, when the dust cleared, the ultra-conservatives won because you had isolated the power of the vote. Am I making any sense here? I'm not talking partisan, I'm just giving you political history. So then they end up with the supermajority, okay? And the governor, all right? And in the season we're in, see right now, because the Democrats, it doesn't take any party that can change about 1 or 2% of the election. That's, you know, you can kind of control it. And that's what happened right here in North Carolina. So when they won, because it doesn't matter to us who's in the office. Once you're in the office, you're supposed to govern as a North Carolinian. You're supposed to govern based on the Constitution. So once they won, we wrote a letter to the governor and said, Governor, listen, you're governor now. You're not a Republican governor, you're governor. And there are some things bigger than Democrat and Republican. We said this to the Democrats too. There are some things bigger than liberal and Democrat. We said, listen, you have a choice. There were governors before you, like Republican Governor Holshouser, who set up the rural economic development, and that was a good thing, and we supported that. Or like Governor Martin, who put more money in public education. We supported that. Or like President Eisenhower, who said that public education was a matter of national security and the interstate system was a matter of national security, and we supported that. Or like the Republicans who led and helped with certain Democrats and passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Civil Rights. So there was this history of moderation. And we called on the governor and the legislature. We said, look, you got power, but you still have to be guided by the Constitution, because a majority does not override the Constitution. It doesn't override certain values. So we said to the governor, if you will focus on economic sustainability, addressing poverty and bringing jobs. Number 2, health, educational equality for all students. Number 3, health care for all. Number 4, addressing the disparities in the criminal justice system. And number 5, expanding and protecting civil rights and voting rights. Regardless of your party, we'll stand right there with you. Wrote him a letter, went and met with him. He said that he was going to focus on jobs. That's what he said. Now, Tillis and Berger never would meet. On February the 9th, we brought nearly 17,000 people to Raleigh. Not black people, white people, black people, Latinos, young, old, preachers, professors, and we put forth a progressive agenda because we don't just curse the darkness. Y'all with me? Stay with me, I know, yeah. And so, and they still wouldn't meet with her. And then the legislative season starts. And we said to this group, listen, there are some principles. And this is why we're on this tour, and this is why on April 29th, 17 of us went in and exercised our constitutional right, and we wouldn't give them up even though they said they were going to arrest us, and now over 300 people have come. And while one report says 1,600 people, it was actually closer to 3,000 people, the count really, that were there last Monday. And why we're going to have more Monday again Monday, and why the clergy is leading on Monday. White, black, ecumenically, and we're calling on other people, and I'll tell you more about what we're going to do Monday and what we're going to do Wednesday of next week. But we said to them, listen, regardless of your political party, there are some principles that are so dear and so noble and so true that they ought to guide our public life no matter what your party is. And no matter how much money somebody spent to get you elected. Because these principles are rooted in our Constitution and they are as sacred as the Scriptures. Now, what are those principles? In 1868, when we wrote that Constitution, our foreparents did, they wrote these words: we hold it to be self-evident. Now, those words are in the Declaration of Independence federally, but they are in our state constitution in the state. We hold it to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty. Now, most folk think that pursuit of happiness comes. That in the state constitution, that's not what's next. What's next is the enjoyment of the fruit of your own labor and the pursuit of happiness. Because we're a southern state, so they had to make sure that they put a prohibition against slavery and a prohibition against making folk work for less than what they deserve. That's why that's in there, the fruit of your own labor. Hold on to that, because we're going to come back to the fruit of your own labor and happiness. That's in the Constitution. Then the next part of the Constitution says, this is 145 years ago. This is not something we just came up with. All political power, listen, is vested in and derived from the people. And all government of right originates from the people and is founded upon their will only and should be instituted and used only for the good of the whole. So when you get elected and you swear to uphold the Constitution, you are saying, I will only use this power for life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of labor and happiness, and only for the good of the whole. Not for a lobbyist, not for Art Pope, not for Alec, not for black, not for white, but for the good of the whole. That had nothing to do with Republican and Democrat. That had nothing to do with liberal and conservative. That's a constitutional principle. And in the federal constitutional principle, common good, promoting the general welfare, establishing justice. That's language that's bigger than these little puny categories of party. And that's what the politician first is supposed to hold that in one hand. Now, in the other hand, or in the other side of the heart, when you're an elected official, you're supposed to, you put your hand on the Bible so you at least ought to know what's in it. So there is a moral dimension to political life. Now, if you know the Bible, private sin is between you, your God, and your priest or your pastor. So you ought not be legislating on private issues, because Jesus didn't even do that. He didn't legislate on people's private stuff in public. Oh, I got to prove that. Let me see here. Remember they brought a lady's private sin to Jesus and said she got caught in the act of that. See, I'm not saying there aren't some private sins, but you don't legislate that in public. They wanted to stone her. Jesus started writing, and somebody said he was writing their private sin, and when he got to most of them, they were gone. They understood. See, because really nobody wants your private sin dealt with in public. And God said you don't do that. That's between you, your God, and your priest. But now, when folk were in the temple cheating and using their political and religious power to oppress people, when they were using their positions of authority to create systems of inequality, Jesus didn't take them in private. He found some cords, tied them up, and started turning over tables in public and declared, my house shall be a house of prayer for all. Y'all see what I'm saying? When Jesus preached his first public sermon, he said that if you're gonna follow me, if you're gonna have a moral agenda, that agenda has to be rooted in how you care for the poor. Preach good news to the poor. The Greek word there is patokos. It means those who've been made poor by government and economic systems of exploitation. Healing to the brokenhearted, recovery of sight to the blind, helping those that have been bruised, and declaring acceptable year of the Lord. Those are the so when folk want to say, well, we have a political moral agenda, but that moral agenda is abortion, prayer in the school, and gender issues. That you have a right for those to be on your moral radar, and your different perspective on that is protected both by the Bible and the First Amendment. But the problem with that is those are private matters between you, your priest, and your God. And the second part of that is in the scriptures, the things I just mentioned, that there aren't but about 10 scriptures that even deal with that. But if you take all the scriptures that deal with poverty and treating children right and helping the sick and treating your neighbor right, if you would take all those scriptures and cut them out of the Bible, there would be no Bible. So those who have a narrow-minded moral agenda that say the moral agenda for politicians is prayer in the school, abortion, and gender issues, they don't know the book. They are majoring in minors and minoring in majors. See, the book is clear. Just like the Constitution, establishing justice, promoting the common good, promoting the general welfare. Those are noble ideals that are bigger than Democrat and Republican. They have to guide our public life. And on the moral side, the Bible is clear. Do justice. That ain't a suggestion for individuals. That's a public policy statement for governments. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk on Micah 6:8. Isaiah 10:1-3. Woe unto those who legislate evil, who pass wicked rules and rob the poor of their rights. Huh? Yeah. Amos, when he says, woe unto those who pervert justice in the courts. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Or Jesus, when he said to governments, this is how you're going to be judged when it's all over. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick, did you help me get insurance? How is it that the folk, the evangelical Christian right is so wrong and says so little about what God says so much? How is it that they only want to talk about abortion and prayer in the school and homosexuality and have nothing to say with how folk treat the poor and how folk deal with equality? How do you call yourself an evangelical Christian and be against health care when your leader set up free health clinics everywhere he went? Y'all know Jesus set up free health clinics. Jesus believed in universal health care. All you had to do was be sick around Jesus and he'd heal you. You know what I mean? Come on, somebody. And then he told his disciples, he said, don't you dare charge for the gift. He said, whatever you freely receive, freely give. I mean, how you gonna be cut mental health services and claim to be a Christian when all Jesus did was went around getting demons out of folk for free and healing folk with mental conditions? How you gonna be against the vulnerable when Jesus died for the vulnerable? How you gonna be against helping people and making sure people have food and sustenance whenever Jesus saw folk hungry? He started creating restaurants right there on the side of mountains and let folk come in for free and get some fish and cornbread. See, don't mess with folk who know the book. And I'm tired of people perverting the book. I'm tired of people trying to use the Bible and use Jesus to hurt folk, and they talk so much about what God says so little, and they say so little about what God says so much. And so the constitutional values of the common good, establishing justice, the good of the whole, the biblical values of treating your neighbor right, loving your neighbor, doing justice, these are the big values that ought to guide our public life. And that's what we're asking of this Moral Mondays is not about Republican, Democrat. It's about what's moral. It's about what's right. And so we've asked them, and instead of seeing an agenda rooted in our deepest values, we've seen this ultra-conservative. I don't call them Republicans, because I know some Republicans that don't even like what's going on. This is an ultra-conservative, extreme ideology that evidently has sniffed a little Coke, K-O-C-H. And if you know the history of the Koch brothers, their daddy was Freddie Koch, who founded the John Birch Society, who fought the implementation of Brown versus Board of Education, who fought the NAACP, and who called for the impeachment of President Eisenhower and Earl Warren after the Brown decision. So Charles and David are trying to hold on to the nightmarish vision of their daddy, and we're trying to live out the dream of Dr. King. And something got to give. And our Pope puts his stores in poor communities and then takes that same money out of poor communities and funds political. Now, I know Democrats fund people too, but this man is on a terror. $40-some million, $1 million something too in 22 districts last. But what's so bad not about him funding candidates, it's about he's promoting policies of which I will show you in a minute, where his private industries will benefit, because he gonna make folks so poor they gotta go to his stores and buy stuff. Because he and then you got the Tea Party, and at least 4 of the elements of the Tea Parties have direct connection to extreme racist right-wing groups. So that tea is spiked with racism and classism. And they get mad. I mean, they call the president everything but Mr. President, and even in America. Yeah. And so instead of saying, look, we got power now, but with power, you know what the Spider-Man movie, with great power come great responsibility? And instead of saying, look, we're not going to worry about being Republican, we're going to worry about Democrat, we're going to worry about these noble values, what the Constitution says, what the Bible says, and we're going to do public policy. They have said, we got a supermajority. It might not last long, it probably won't last long, but we're gonna do everything we can to do as much as we can to go back as far as we can. And that's why we have come together, black, white, Hispanic, young, old, labor, all different people. We've come together because of this dangerous, extremist, immoral policy agenda of this group. Now, you say, well, Bob, maybe it ain't that extreme. Well, let me tell you some things that is happening. In one of the first committee meetings that they had, in less than 17 minutes, they voted to deny 500,000 people, poor people, Medicaid, and poor disabled children Medicaid. I was in the meeting. less than 17 minutes. They didn't have no debate. One of their senators said, we don't want that money because it comes from Obama. Another one said that money is a violation of states' rights. And by the way, our state constitution for 145 years has said the General Assembly cannot make a law in this state that contradicts with the federal. And yet they deny a federal opportunity to 500,000 people. And now notice, and the media's in here, get this right. Though the NAACP is leading this, it's a big coalition. I did not say 500,000 black people. I did not say 500,000 Hispanic people. 500,000 poor North Carolinians in a state that has 1.6 million poor people, 600,000 poor children, the 13th highest level of poverty, 25% of North Carolinians without health insurance, and you deny money that now is your money, by the way, that you've already paid, and that money is going to go to other states rather than come right here, billions of dollars, 17 minutes. And they wouldn't even allow the doctors to testify. 80-some doctors came to testify. Many of them, black, white, best in their field. North Carolina is known as a state of medicine. We have some of the best doctors in the world, and they wouldn't even let the doctors testify. That's not public policy. That's extreme and it's immoral. And we got to challenge it. We got to challenge it in the courts. We got to challenge it at the voting booth. We got to challenge it on social media, and we've got to put up a moral challenge. And that's why people are going on Mondays and either standing up, and some of them are submitting to arrest because we cannot be silent.
All right.
But they didn't stop there. The next week, they went in committee in less than 30 minutes. They voted to deny 165,000 people unemployment. Now, they said they wanted to do this to pay off a bill. The governor said it was a necessary evil. And evil is never necessary. It may be a choice, but it's not necessary. You can always find something else to do besides evil. The reason that we were broke, and the Democrats had something to do with this, is because we had not allowed corporations to pay their right share. But we didn't have to take it out on the people who were unemployed. Now, we heard in that committee, one senator said, if you let people have, this is like God said, these entitlements make people lazy. Well, unemployed people are getting unemployment because they want to work and they can't find work. Or because they lost their job and no fault of their own. We've had 300,000 textile jobs. It wasn't their fault, lost. They wasn't their fault. One of them said if you give people $350 a month, it'll make them lazy. They'll stay home and just live off of that. I mean, this is the kind of rhetoric. And see, they're betting that you all not going to hear it because they're going to say it up there in these committees, and the committees are not televised.
All right.
Y'all with me? Yes, sir. When you cut 165,000 people's unemployment, that means on July the 1st, 165,000. Well, right now we know the first 70,000 will happen the first day. Will lose their unemployment. I've been in the grocery store and people come up and fall out crying on my shoulder saying, Rev, I don't know what I'm going to do. At least y'all fighting. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to pay my mortgage. And I'm not talking about just black people. Mm-hmm. The other day we had a lady, one of the secretary of the state conference came up to her and said, look, I can't get up there because I don't have any money to go up there. I'm unemployed. I've been looking for a job over a year and a half. I got 80 cents. I want you to give this Rev Barber to put in this gas tank. That's how bad people are hurting. That's immoral. That's extreme. It doesn't fit the best of our constitutional value, doesn't fit the best of our biblical value. But they didn't stop there. And the governor's already signed both of those. They've already passed. Then they decided, well, if you make $19,190 a month, you don't need a tax credit. 6 years ago, we pushed through the earned income tax credit. Ronald Reagan said that the earned income tax credit was one of the best tools to get people out of poverty. They decided to take that tax, it's been here 6 years, from working people, so that somebody making only $19,000 a year, they wouldn't have to pay no taxes. That's what the earned income tax credit is. They took it and repealed it on 900,000 North Carolinians. I didn't say black. 900,000 North Carolinians, black, white, Republican, Democrat, so that they could give 23 multimillionaires a tax break. Now this is the party that runs on cutting taxes. They said they raised taxes on 900,000 people so they could cut taxes for 23 families. But it's not over. Now they're proposing a tax plan to cut corporate taxes and cut income taxes, but expand sales taxes to 123 services, or maybe 130, that we don't cover. So in other words, they're gonna raise taxes on working poor people. How many of y'all get a haircut? They raising taxes on haircuts. How many of y'all get hairdos? They're gonna make you pay taxes now on your hairdo. How many of you get prescription drugs? They're gonna make you pay taxes on that. How many of you go buy food in the grocery? They're gonna make you pay taxes on all of these things. They're gonna raise taxes on 80% of North Carolinians so they can give 20% a tax cut. This is the same group now that's always out there saying to working class white people, we're gonna cut your taxes so all of these undeserving people don't get entitlements. But not only that, right here in your city, you got a senator down here that has voted to let payday lenders back in the state, and they can charge 300% interest. Yeah. Not only that, this crowd cut $1.6 million from public education last year. They cut so much money last year and changed so many programs. We took them to court, and the court said they were acting unconstitutional. But they don't care. Even though the courts found them guilty, they're appealing the case rather than accepting the court's decision. So thousands of 4-year-olds didn't even get access to More at 4 program because they're still fighting in the courts. They cut $1.6 billion from public education. Now they want to take your tax dollars and give it to private schools through a voucher program. That dog won't hunt because that's what the Pearsall plan offered to do back in the 1950s. And you see what I'm saying? They've cut 30,000 children, poor children, from preschool rolls. There were already 20,000 on the waiting list, so now 50,000 poor kids won't get access to preschool, which is setting them up for nothing but delayed education, which sets you up for nothing but prison. And hear me, y'all, and hear me, media, it's not 30,000 black kids.
All right.
See, that's the lie they sell to working class white people, and then they end up, as my grandma said, cutting off their nose to spite their face.
All right.
Huh? In the budget, one of the budget plans they have, they're proposing cutting $21 million from mental health services. After Newtown, as much as people need that, and now when you attack mentally ill people, you're pretty ruthless. That's pretty immoral. That's pretty extreme to attack mentally ill people, you know. But that's what's happening. So we see attack on public education, attack on the unemployed, attack on those that need Medicaid. And then in addition to that, they're attacking labor rights. They want to write in our Constitution that this state is illegal to operate labor unions. You hear what I'm saying? Illegal to operate labor unions. First of all, labor and civil rights has been one movement, but labor unions fight for people to have collective bargaining. That they participate in the wealth they help make. If you didn't have labor union, you wouldn't have a 5-day work week. If you didn't have labor union, you wouldn't have time off and time and a half and paid sick day. All of that came through the labor movement. And then today, they repealed the Racial Justice Act. It's just just say that slow. Repealed racial justice. Say that. Just say that one more time in 21st century. Repeal. I mean, I know we're in church, but that makes you want to kind of cuss almost. I mean, you think about it. You're going to repeal Medicaid for sick folk. You're going to repeal unemployment, repeal tax credits for poor people. See? Repeal public education, and then repeal Racial Justice Act. And it's interesting. The Racial Justice Act was found constitutional by a Republican judge. It was used by a Democratic judge, and it proved that in the application of the death penalty in North Carolina, race is still a factor. And even proponents of the death penalty stood with us and said, wait a minute, we agree with the death penalty. We don't agree that people ought to get it based on race or based on class. We have the proof. This legislature is saying, ignore the proof, start the death penalty back up, even though North Carolina has had the most people exonerated from death row than any other state in the nation the last 10 years. Right. That means people who would have been dead, who are innocent. Y'all hear what I'm saying? They were innocent and would have been killed if our system of death had worked. And yet these good Christians, some of them who claim to be, who serve a Savior who was crucified by the state, want to use the same system now that's been proven flawed in the 21st century. There's something wrong with that, y'all. That's cruel and unusual. That's constitutionally inconsistent. That's morally indefensible. And most of this stuff is economically insane. These folk are like Robin Hood in reverse. This is like George Wallace in the 21st century. George Wallace stood in the door of opportunity for education. They want to stand in the door of opportunity for health care, the door of opportunity for the unemployed, the door of opportunity for our children, and they're brazen and they're bold. They don't want public debate. And then here's the final piece. Now I haven't gone over everything that they're trying to do, but the final piece is, it's almost like they woke up and said, if we do all of this, North Carolinians got this core in them. You know, North Carolinians been a pretty progressive folk. I mean, we've done a lot of stuff, but we've been a little bit more progressive than the southern states. In fact, I was in Mississippi, I told y'all, with Merle Evers, and the folk had one question for me. They said, Reverend Barber, we heard that the North Carolina legislature is doing this, doing this, doing this. We heard that the North Carolina legislature has cut so much money from public education that North Carolina is now below us. Y'all didn't hear that. Below Mississippi. We're 49th in the nation. Utah is the only state above us. They have cut so much from public education that North Carolina is now 49. Now, granted, under the Democrats we were 47, but at least we weren't going down. Yeah. And we were pushing to go a little bit better. This crowd says, let's rush to the bottom. Yippee! And then once they break public education, you know, they want money to go to their private schools, and guess who invests in private schools? You know, they don't want Medicaid, but then they want to privatize Medicaid. Guess who's going to invest in y'all see what I'm saying? They don't want to fund mental education, but then they want to invest in mental services. Guess who's, you know, it's a shell game. It's a trick. It's corporate greed. It's takeover, you know. And so the folk in Mississippi, Reverend, and I know we're in a Baptist church, but they said, we got a question for you, Reverend Bob. I said, what's the question? They said, it's just a simple question. What the hell is wrong with y'all up there in North Carolina? They said we used to look to North Carolina to have some hope. When we wanted to talk about what we wanted to bring to Mississippi, we looked to North Carolina. But now it looks like you all are worse than us. And anytime Mississippi can criticize North Carolina, Houston, we got a problem. We have a real, it ain't a Republican problem or a Democratic problem, it's a problem. It's a moral problem. And it's a constitutional problem. And it's almost like these folk woke up and they said, if we do all this stuff, next year in about 500 days, people are going to vote us out. Oh, I know what we'll do. While we got the power, let's change the election laws. So they passed voter ID. They passed a voter ID plan worse than South Carolina and Alabama. Doesn't even allow private school students. We got 39 private schools, universities in this state. They said their IDs don't even count. So if you go to Duke, your ID doesn't count. You go to Shaw, your ID doesn't count. You go to State or North Carolina Central, it does. Alabama at least allows private school. I said Alabama. All right. They passed it in the House that one senator said, well, what about inclement weather like a hurricane? Let's allow people, at least if a hurricane comes through, because we tend to have hurricanes. They said no. South Carolina at least does that. Mickey Mashaw was on the floor. This you all ain't gonna believe this. You really gonna think I've lost my mind. Mickey Mashaw, who, by the way, the law we have in North Carolina now is the best law. Signature attestation. You sign your name, you get a 5-year felony. Right. That law is a compromise between Democrats and Republicans. Paul Stam and Mickey Mashaw in 2003 collaborated and came up with that, and Stam as a Republican agreed that that was all we needed. Because the Article 6 of our Constitution says that the legislature cannot change qualifications for voting. That if you're 18, naturalized or born in this state, the state legislature has no authority to change anything. They can change voting dates, but it can't change qualification. That's a right. You know how the governor says, well, he wants to make the government customers. We're not customers, we're citizens. Right. Citizens. Customers only buy if they have the money. Some things citizens get just because they're born, money or not. That's why the Constitution says all elections must be free. You can put no monetary qualification on me running for office or voting. You can't tell me I got to go out and buy a certificate or buy an ID or somebody gonna pay for it. That's a poll tax. It's a violation of our state constitution and the 24th Amendment. But anyway, these folk passed this law. So Mickey Mashaw, has 40 years, say 40 years. 40 years. Is 40 years as a U.S. attorney and a constitutional lawyer. He's the senior member of that house up there, the oldest one. I was sitting in the back. You can't write this stuff. Eric, can I move around some? Yeah. You can't write this stuff. Mickey Mashaw rises to the floor, says, Mr. Speaker, I would like, with 40 years of constitutional law, I would like to express some issues of history because we're getting ready to make a historic decision that has never been made in 237 years since this state. We've never had voter ID. And by the way, even when we knew that racist white supremacists were cheating at the ballot box, because they cheat and stuff, and they kept black people. When we fought for the right to vote, we never argued for other people to have an ID. If anybody ought to have been my daddy, who couldn't vote when he was 30 years old with a master's degree and didn't have to take the voting right. But you have no black people and other white people who worked on the civil rights. We never said the Voting Rights Act of 65 must make sure that everybody got an ID because we don't trust them white folk. We never said that. We said just let everybody vote. Right. Like the law says since 1870. But anyway, Mickey Mashaw started telling the history of voting. The Republican history of voting, the Democratic history of voting. So this lady who happens to be one of these extremists says, Mr. Speaker, point of order. Speaker Tillis recognized. She says, I thought that we were debating the voter ID. I didn't know we were having a history lesson. So Representative Mashaw says, Mr. Speaker, this is a house of history. This legislative chamber is a house of history. The Constitution is rooted in history. You have to go back in history to understand the framework of the Constitution. That's what you Republicans, he called them that. He said, you always say that. You say we want to go back to the original intent, what the framers meant. The Speaker said, I'm going to rule you out of order, stay on the subject. And they wouldn't allow any more discussion of history. Yes. Yeah. Oh, he's mellow. No, he's mellow. And Mickey, right, because I know Mickey. And I know Mickey's fight. But it was all, when I saw Mickey sit down that day, it was almost like, I can't not believe that in the 21st century, in this General Assembly, and that building was built in 1963, that we are seeing the kind of resurgence of ignorance and racism all over again. So they passed it in the House, going to Senate. But not only that, on Monday, Thursday before we celebrate or remember Good Friday, the crucifixion of Jesus, they rolled out that bill and an omnibus bill on voting. In other words, we're going to change a lot of stuff. And in that omnibus bill, where they rolled it out, which we have dubbed that they decided to crucify voting rights. And they decided to crucify Medicaid and crucify public education. But in that bill, there's a bill that says if you're a felon and you go to jail and you pay your debt to society and you come out, they want you to wait 5 years before you can apply for your voting rights. Then you have to apply to a local board of election and they have to vote unanimous. Now, if you study the statistics of the number of blacks that have been caught up in what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, you can see there's a contrast, there's a analysis between the number of blacks with felons without their voting rights and the number of white males and who can vote. And if you didn't have felony disenfranchisement, the number of eligible white males and black males would be about the same thing. So if you want to slow down this new reality, one of the ways to do it is to create more felony enfranchisement. So what they're saying is you can redeem, you can be redeemed. And we believe in redemption in church, right? You can be redeemed, pay your debt, do all of that. And you can be working and paying taxes, but you won't be able to vote until you apply. You're going to apply now for rights guaranteed you in the Constitution, the 15th Amendment. And then 3 people are going to get the vote, and they have to vote unanimously. Oh, it gets worse. There's another part of that bill, it's floating around now there somewhere, where someone came up with the idea that we ought to be able to test people's mental competency before they vote. Now that takes you back to the eugenics program, when black and white women were sterilized based on the fact that somebody tested them and said they were mentally ill and therefore didn't deserve or didn't have a baby. That's Hitler stuff.
Yes, it is.
That ain't America. I don't care what your party is. This stuff ain't America. This ain't North Carolina. It gets worse. There's another bill, and you know, God sends you signs. The computer got so frustrated with what they were doing that the computer got the Holy Ghost. I'm telling you the truth. Because the Bible said that the one thing the Holy Ghost does is lead you in all truth. So they wrote this bill, and when the bill came out of the computer with its number on it, so you don't write like with this. The number was 666. God is my witness. The Senate, your senator's on it. Tillman. And the senator that proposed it is from down in Pasquotank County, because he only won by 21 votes, and the students at Elizabeth City University voted against him. So he wants to go after them. So the bill says if you send your child from Randolph County to E&T, which is right over there, right? But it's another county. Right. And your child, there are 2 or 3 precincts up there around the school and on that campus. And your child registers to vote, which the Constitution says they can, where they go to school, you will be charged $2,500. See, because you get a tax credit for every child you got going to school. They're going to take that $2,500 tax credit simply because your child engages in their civic responsibility. And the bill is entitled Senate Bill 666. And so, this is where we are. That's right, the Lord's calling you. There's a call going out, and somebody needs to answer it. There's some people that believe in right that need to answer it. We in Randolph County need to answer. There's a call for help all over North Carolina, because there are people who want to take us backwards. It's extreme, it's immoral, and I believe the Lord is calling us, saying, and asking, who will go for me? And there needs to be somebody that'll say, here I am. Because these folk have sold us a bill of goods, especially on working class white people, because they feed working class white people these red meat issues, and they vote for them, and then when they get elected, they hurt the very people that voted for them. They take money out of the constituents' pockets. They take money out of the poor whites and working class pockets, just like they do ours. And they make sure they benefit, these corporate interests, from the tax break. And I said to somebody, whether you agree with the NAACP or not on most issues, when folk attack poor people, and they're poor whites and blacks, when people attack public education, when people attack unemployed people, you may not agree with us on some other issue, but you ought to agree with us on right versus wrong. All right. It doesn't make no matter what color you are. You ought to agree with us on constitutional values. Right. You ought to agree with us on moral values. You ought to agree with us that there ought to at least be debate in a democracy. We may not, I understand in politics you don't get all you want, but there's something about negotiating and moderate politics versus just being mean and cruel and premeditated. Come on. And making us fight in the 21st century battles we've already fought. My mama's 80 years old. She works at the school that she integrated. My parents brought me back to the South and entered me into segregated public school. We were in Indiana, schools were already integrated. But their contribution was we come back to the South and we're going to help desegregate schools. My father was among the first science teachers at the all-white high school. My mother was the first office manager at the all-white high school. She works at the school where the children, that they used to call her the N-word, and now the children of those folk call her mama. And when we went to jail, she called me, she said, boy, she's about the only folk to call me boy. She said, boy, what you doing in jail? I said, Mama, so. She said, I know why you in jail. I'm just messing with you. She said, let me tell you something. She said, I never thought I would have a baby 50 years ago, and that child would have to grow up and fight to hold on to the thing that me and your daddy fought to win. All right. And she said, not just me and your daddy, but me and your daddy and other good white people and other folk that fought to make this nation. I said, well, Mama, how do you feel about it? She said, I don't have but one thing. You better stand. All right. She said, I'm 80 years old, and I'm telling you, you better stand up. Because not to stand up means you disrespect me, and you disrespect everything that folk fought for to get us where we are. I'm telling you, we're in a serious moment, y'all. It ain't a Democratic moment. It ain't a Republican moment. It's not a liberal moment. It's a moment about the soul of our state. And the soul of everybody's watching North Carolina. That's right. But North Carolina has tended to be first in flight and first in many progressive things. This state, on the order of the longleaf pine, it says we are supposed to be the place where the weak grow strong and the strong grow great. And the strong only go great when they help the weak grow strong. Strong don't go great by hurting folks. Right. Our state motto says we are a state that will be rather than to sing. We will be about what we say about. On the state seal is the picture of justice and plenty. Liberty and plenty. And the idea is that unless you have justice, you will not have liberty and plenty. But if you have justice, you will have liberty, freedom, and plenty. There's enough to go around if we come together as a people. And that's why Moral Mondays is about. It's not about just the NAACP. It's about saying it's one thing to take baby steps, Brother Matthew, going forward. It's another thing to fall all the way back. All right. And the policies these folk are putting in place are so extreme and so immoral. If we don't challenge them, they will damage this state for years to come. Somebody said, well, they got the votes. They do have the votes. But the Constitution has been written so that the majority cannot run roughshod over a minority. All right. They do have the votes, but they are only but 86 people up there to make up their majority. There are 4 million North Carolinians that can vote and 10 million of us in this state. Ain't no way in the world we ought to let 86 people just run over us. All right. And we don't say anything. They do have the votes, but we have another election coming. They are temporary in their residency. They do have the votes, but we still have the courts. And we have 38 lawyers that have given them now signed on to give free legal advice. So we're going to challenge everything that they've done, not just the voting stuff. We're going to challenge it in the court based on the law. All right. They do have the votes, but people have had the votes before. You know, George Wallace had the votes. But by the end of his life, he was giving money to the Negro National Scholarship. Jim Crow had the vote, but a little lady named Rosa Parks helped bring it down. Slavery had the vote, but Harriet Tubman had moss on the north side of the tree, faith in God, and a heart that would not give up. Apartheid had the vote, but Mandela had the courage, and he ended up being president over the very system that put him in jail. That's why this is about faith and about moral, because we're not attacking this as just mere people. We're not using the weapons of their warfare, meanness and hurt. The weapons of our warfare are truth and love and justice. And love and justice may get crucified, it may get beat up, but it's never defeated. First, Reverend, I was bothered that they rolled that law out on Monday, Thursday, before Good Friday. I said, who would do something like this in Holy Week? But then I said, but they did it to Jesus. That's why we call it Holy Week. And then the Lord said, look again, son. And I said, look what? They said, yes, they're crucifying some things during Holy Week, but now they've messed up because every crucifixion demands a resurrection. And you are the resurrection. I am the resurrection. Your energy is the resurrection. If we stand up together, we are the resurrection. Sometimes you got to understand that what folk mean for evil, God turns into good. You wouldn't be in a church on Thursday night listening to the NAACP President, but what folk mean for evil, God turns to good. There wouldn't be 38 lawyers who have joined us, but what folk mean for evil, God turns to good. There wouldn't be 300 folk who've gone to be arrested. It's never happened in the history of North Carolina, but what folk mean for evil, God turned to good. The first day we went in the legislature, you know, I can't turn my neck too good because I have a problem from football. But when we went in, I can hear real good. You know, the Lord gives you something extra. So here we come. Here we come. Come here, brother. We come walking in the legislature like this. And I heard somebody out of my ear saying, I thought the NAACP's coming. What all them white folk doing with them? Hold up! You can't arrest them. And I said, it's too late now. It's too late now. And when you get white folk together, and black folk together, and Latino folk together, and rural folk together, and young folk together, and preachers together, something's happening in North Carolina. There's a movement, and they might win some battles, but they ain't gonna win the war. Somebody said to me the other day, I'm trying to let this thing go, but somebody said to me the other day, Barber, what good is Martin going to do? What good is going to jail going to do? I said, well, ask David, what good did a rock do? I don't know, but God can get in a rock. Ask Moses, what good did a rod do? I don't know, but God can make a rod partner. Ask Daniel, what good did prayer do? Huh? Ask Shadrach, Meshach, and that bad Negro, what did prayer do? What did courage do? I don't know what it will do, but I know with faith in God, all things are possible. I know what Hebrews says. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39, we are not of those who shrink back unto perdition, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. Where faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. All I know is I want to run on and see what the end will be. And so that's where we are. And we need you, Randolph County.
All right.
We need you to stand up. We need you to hold press conferences here and expose it. Monday, clergy are leaving. You're going to see some announcements tomorrow you ain't never seen in this state of major denominations. Bishops of major denominations are going to announce that they're leaving. And so Monday we want clergy to come, but we want people to come. And the clergy are going to bless this movement. Tomorrow Monday, if you're going to do civil disobedience, you need to get in Raleigh by 3 o'clock and meet at the church. It'll come to Brother Don. He'll have it by tomorrow because we're going to change the church location to get training. Because you have to make that decision on. I can't tell you to do civil disobedience. We have lawyers that will give you legal advice. I won't do that. It has to be your own personal say. But you don't have to do civil disobedience. Just come be a witness. Come support. And then on Wednesday, we're having something next week we're escalating. It's going to be called Witness Wednesday. Because that's the 12th is the 50th anniversary of the death of Medgar Evers. So we're going to walk through the legislature and walk around it with pictures of the martyrs and people who've died. And we're calling on all NAACPers and people in labor to join us. In fact, Cecil Roberts from the United Mine Workers is coming down, and he's going to join with us because mine workers even understand what's happening in North Carolina is bad for the whole country. So he's coming down, just like George Gresham from 1199 in New York came this past month. He's the leader of the biggest union in the local union in the country, 400,000 members. But Cecil Roberts, my good friend, is going to be coming down. And we will have some civil disobedience that day too, but our focus is going to be on witnesses. And that day we're going to announce voter registration summer 2013, like Freedom Summer of '64. And we want everybody to register, everybody they can, from July the 12th to August 28th, from the death of Medgar Evers to the March on Washington. We want to see the more registration and voting than we've ever seen in this state. And we're going to announce that. And then the following week, we're going to have another tomorrow Monday, and we're going to be announcing where we're going from there on the 17th. But we need you there Monday. And if you can't come Monday, we need you a bus. It'd be beautiful to have a bus, a van, a large contingent, a caravan from this city, from this county. Hook up with other counties. Because this ain't about Democrat and Republican. It ain't about liberal. Those categories are too small. This is about the heart and the soul. Our democracy is on the deathbed, on the sick bed. It's about to have a heart attack. You are the defibrillators. You have to shock this state and these politicians. The governor said the other day, he said, I don't want to talk to them. I said, you don't want to talk to those 10 veterans that stood up there, black and white, Marines, Army, Navy SEALs, who said, listen, this is immoral. You don't want to talk to the people you are taking the unemployment, they're medical. Maybe it's because you can't talk to them and look them in the eye and defend what you're doing.
Exactly.
Maybe that's what it is. But we got to talk even if they don't want to talk. And our goal with this, even if they don't change, the goal is to make sure nobody in this state doesn't know what's going on. We're shining a moral light on it because only light can drive out dark. And nobody in this country does not know. If that's the only thing we accomplish is making sure, and we're going to do more than that, but if we make sure that everybody's educated, everybody is clear, and that we raise a moral witness, love and justice is never lost. Gets beat up sometimes, gets crucified, but it's never lost.